And I think that's a perfect segue for the second episode, because a lot of this I felt like should not have been a part of it, because, kind of in hindsight, as you're watching it the first time, you're not thinking too much about it. But as you kind of see how everything unravels, I felt like the second episode was probably one of those that had the least usefulness to the overall story, because to your point, right, we have Jinx. So this is where we meet the character of Isha, right? Who, kind of plays, I would say, a important role in kind of shaping Jinx's personality.
Yeah, she's kind of like a mirror of Powder, really.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that is an excellent call, and I totally agree. I think that it was a very, I think they knew what they were doing when they did that. And we have her meet Isha as we're kind of seeing this power vacuum that's happened after the death of Silco. And we see Savika, who's trying to help kind of keep everything together, but doesn't have, I think, the same leadership skills that Silco had. And we see kind of some of the moving parts that kind of play a bigger role in the overall story, where we have it kind of transitions over to Viktor, who awakens from his time in the Hex Core, and we kind of see his body has now been modified by everything that's going on. And this is where Viktor and Jace kind of have this kind of discussion about the use of Hex Tech or the Hex Core or the Hex Gates, whatever Hex related thing you want to talk about. And this is causing them and their friendship to ultimately fracture. And it's so interesting because watching the first time, you don't know that this is pretty much, I would say, the whole crux of the second season is the relationship between Viktor and Jace and how everything happens, where almost everything else is a secondary thing. So I know we talked a little bit, but were you also taken back by the fact that really the second season was more of a discussion about Viktor and Jace, as opposed to the relationships we see with, like, Vi and Jinx or Powder, depending on who you want to phrase it as?
Yeah, I think they should have just let Viktor die. That would have been far more impactful, because what they did to Viktor, it's kind of like that quote from The Dark Knight. You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Because Viktor was a very sympathetic character in season 1, and you can sort of empathize and appreciate where he was coming from, because given that he was disabled and given the limitations that he had to endure, you could understand his motivations for what he for his work with the Hex Core. So when you see him in season 2, where he's sort of become this messianic figure, he kind of morphs later on.
Jesus.
Yeah, he morphs into something that's far more destructive later on. You begin to wonder, like, what was the point of all of that? Because to your point, episode 2 was pointless, but the whole character development of Viktor, throughout season 2 is also pointless as well, because it didn't add anything to the storyline overall, and frankly, it was very much unnecessary. Also,
I agree. Yeah, I think a different direction would have done a lot better.
That's what I'm saying. I think had he died as a result, I think what would have been far more impactful was that Jace kind of descends into the sort of grief to where he begins to become more and more power hungry, and I also feel like what they did with Caitlyn, where they kind of manipulated her and used her as the instrument of Piltover's enforcement as part of the whole covert coup d'etat that Mbessa was enacting. I thought that should have been used to Jace, because Jace would have been far more impactful, because this is the guy who knows how to construct and manipulate Hex Core. So yes. I feel like had they taken the character manipulation that they used on Caitlyn and applied it to Jace, that would have been far more impactful, because they could have used Viktor's death as the reason for him kind of going crazy and Piltover becoming a military state, which would have accelerated the whole conflict between Piltover and Zaun. But yes. Again, it's a missed opportunity. I kept banging the table as I was watching. I kept thinking Caitlyn is just not that strong enough of a character to be manipulated.
Agreed. Yeah, I think this is where, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because that was absolutely something I was thinking about too the whole time. This was a big missed opportunity for, I think, the character that had the most impact on how that was all going to be happening, which is Jace, because Caitlyn,
Well, because
was never really.
Because Caitlyn's a soldier. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, nothing against soldiers, but soldiers, you know, can be manipulated pretty easily. What I'm saying is, it would been far more tragic if you had taken someone like Jace, who is very, who in season 1 is very calm, very collected, very measured. If you use Victor's death as sort of the springboard for his descent into grief, that would have been far more impactful. Kind of like, again, to use the Dark Knight reference, it's kind of like how the Joker turned Harvey Dent into a crazed vigilante going around killing everybody. That was far more impactful because we know the potential that Harvey Dent has. If we had taken something like that, I think Jace could have been the villain of season 2, who would have had a very far more I guess, for lack of a better word, far more rewarding, story arc, where he goes from, someone who's grief stricken to the villain to, finally, redeeming himself at the end. I think that would have been far more impactful. Would have at least, brought an end to the whole, Arcane saga much better than what
Yes,
we would get.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree, and I think that's something that we see a lot of, right? Is that we have so many characters, and I feel like they're just trying to have everyone play too much of a role, when there was certain characters that needed the extra screen time that was missed,
or
I think,
characters who shouldn't have been there at all. I'm just saying.
yeah, exactly, right, because I think about, like, for instance, right, we have Echo, right, and I'm gonna talk about him a little bit here, because, like, he obviously plays a huge factor at the end, but really he doesn't have that much significance throughout much of the story, right? Like,
because he really doesn't bring anything to the table, really.
Yeah, agreed, right? And like I said, this is not a slight against his character. I really liked him, and I think, like, his whole battle with Jinx and everything was so well done and put together. But I think too, if you wanted to do more with this character, you had to do more. You had to give him more screen time, and I felt like it was extremely lacking, because really you have Echo and Heimerdinger, right? Who kind of are, like, they kind of notice, like, there's something wrong with this tree, and it has, like, the corruption on it. So they're like, okay, we're gonna break into the labs, and this is where they kind of meet Jace, and this is what kind of takes them on their own little story, because they kind of get thrown into, and I'm gonna say multiverse for now, right? I want to save that for the episode 7 when we get there, but they kind of throw them out there into this episode. Or when they film into this multiverse, and they're kind of, we don't see a lot of them for a good chunk of that second act, and I think that that's a shame. But one thing that absolutely stuck out to me is just how good, like, just the visuals are. Like, it was so, like, them being, like, transferred into that, like, multiverse. Just seeing how all that was happening was just so visually impressive. And I like how that's happening as we're having this battle between Vi and Jinx, and Caitlyn and Savika are all kind of squaring off in this fight. And I like how all that's kind of happening at the same time. The music is really good. And this is, like, to me, what Arcane had the ability to do if they just kind of maybe put the focus on some other aspects of it, because we see this, like, really cool sequence where you have Vi fighting Jinx, and it looks like Vi is about to punch out Jinx or kill her, whatever we want to say is going to be happening there. And Isha comes up, and she, like, puts herself on the line, and I like how, like, taken back Vi looks as she's like this. She's just like, oh my gosh, like, I always talk about, Jinx kind of having this monstrous intent, and now you're almost thinking to yourself, like, hey, like, who's the monster now? Like, having this little girl go out of her way to help protect her is such a big thing. But then you also see on the flip side, right? You see, like, Caitlyn's, kind of bloodthirst to, kill Jinx, and, kind of having that quarrel where Caitlyn kind of recognizes, like, hey, this isn't right. Like, you can't put, other people in jeopardy for your own, like, kind of personal squabble. And just to kind of see all that, I thought was super impressive. So as much as we're going to talk a lot about the story and how it kind of misses the mark in a good bit of places. This definitely remind me of how strong of a show it could be. Looking at just the excellent visuals and just the soundtrack, which I think is really something that is superb. So, what did you think about that?
I mean, it's a pity that that's the exception and not the rule, really.
Yes.
I mean, it was far more patchy in season 2 than it was in season 1.
Agreed. Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that Caitlyn comes off far worse than everybody else in the series, because you would think someone who suffered a loss like that would kind of try to find a way to be measured, but to your point, she becomes a sort of crazy character who just has a hair trigger and just has to go and shoot everybody because that's her way of grieving. I will say this. I do think it's interesting that Isha kind of, sees herself as like, Jinx's protector in a weird way, because even though Jinx is supposed to be, well, I'll say this, air quotes, look after Isha. It's actually Isha is kind of looking after her because she's sort of Jinx's anchor into reality. Because we know she pretty much has this propensity for kind of going off and losing herself in the moment. There's like this one scene where she's talking to an empty chair and she's like, oh, so you're giving me the cold shoulder too. Obviously it's an allusion to her chatting with Silco. So I feel like Isha kind of serves as as a sort of concrete figure with whom she can interact with and know that she's not going completely insane.
Yes.
And we'll see later on that what happens to what happens to Isha when she gets arrested, that kind of spurs her into getting back into the fight. And then what we see later on, the battle at the complex, that kind of breaks her right then and there, because she's effectively lost that link to reality, because because we've seen what happened with the relationship between her and Vi is that pretty much has been is dead at that point. So as much as she wants to be dismissive of of Isha serves as a surrogate to Vi, to help her sort of maintain that familial and sisterly connection that she didn't have, or where that was lost when she and Vi had a falling out in season 1.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree with you with that, because man, like, just to have her character, and we'll definitely talk about her through Act 2 as Isha, and kind of the important role that I think she has for just Jinx's overall sanity, because she absolutely is that link to, like, I'll lose herself.
I'll say this. Out of all of the characters in season 2, I think she's the one who plays the most crucial role. And that's given what we've seen with all the other characters, that's not saying much, but I think Isha plays a far more significant, important role in season 2, and for all the characters, than even Jace himself or Viktor. Even though Viktor is supposed to be, did you get the feeling that Viktor was supposed to be the main villain of season 2?
Yeah, I think I would definitely have him be the main villain, as far as the characters go, just because of I guess his warped idea of kind of finding perfection, right? Like, and I think there's just so much interesting kind of like debate you have between Viktor and Jace, as far as like, how do you look at humanity? Like, sometimes not everything doesn't have to be perfect in order for society to exist. And, there's something you could say about people's imperfections that makes people human. So yeah, there's a lot of very haughty kind of messages you can look at, but yeah, I would definitely agree with you. Viktor was ultimately the villain for, really the show overall, right? And I think the plot thread that to me is the weakest, and we see it right at the end of this third episode in Act 1, right, is this